In the summer of 1981, archaeologists were digging at the ruins of St. Bees Priory in Cumbria. At first, it was just another dig, sorting through old stones, noting burials, and piecing together bits of medieval life. But when they opened a coffin sealed in lead, they found something completely unexpected. Inside wasn't the dry bones they anticipated, but a man who looked as if he had only recently died. His skin was soft, his hair and beard still on his face, and even his organs were preserved. So what was really happening here? How did a body nearly 600 years old manage to stay preserved? The unknown. By the late 20th century, researchers were studying the Priory's remains and the burials beneath it to learn more about medieval life and death. What they did not expect was that under the church floor, they would uncover one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds in Britain. The team was particularly focused on the chancel, the space near the high altar, because that's where the wealthiest or most important individuals were often buried. In medieval times, being laid to rest closer to the altar was seen as a privilege reserved for high-status figures, a way of securing proximity to God, even in death. As they worked their way through the stones, the archaeologists came upon a large coffin that instantly stood out. Unlike the simple wooden boxes or hastily dug earth burials that were common, this one was heavy, carefully sealed, and made entirely of lead. A lead coffin in itself wasn't unheard of, but the effort and expense required to produce one suggested that whoever rested inside was no ordinary person. Lead had to be mined, smelted, transported, and worked into sheets sturdy enough to form a protective shell. Then the seams had to be soldered or hammered shut. This was not something done for commoners. It was reserved for the elite, the wealthy, or those with powerful connections to the church. That meant before the coffin was even opened, there were strong hints that the body inside belonged to someone significant, perhaps a knight or cleric of high rank. When the lid was finally pried open, it left them stunned. Inside was a man whose body appeared astonishingly intact, despite being buried for over 600 years. His skin still covered his limbs, yellowed and shrunken but recognizably human. His fingernails and toenails were clearly visible. Hair clung to his scalp. When they inspected his torso, they found internal organs still preserved, something virtually unheard of in medieval burials. It was as if time had stopped at the moment of death. The discovery forced the team to stop and change course. Normally, when archaeologists uncover human remains, it's pretty straightforward. Take notes, measure the bones, collect samples. But this wasn't just a skeleton. This was a whole body, with skin and organs still preserved after centuries. That meant slowing down, bringing in special precautions, and handling everything with extra care. The body was carefully moved so experts could perform an autopsy, and this wasn't like the usual work done on ancient remains. Normally, all you've got are bones. But here, they were looking at preserved tissue, real organs, even the man's last meal. It suddenly felt less like archaeology, and more like modern pathology. For once, they could ask questions that went beyond age or cause of death. Things like what kind of health he had, what he ate, even what diseases he might have carried. It was like the past wasn't so distant after all. The small details mattered too. Pieces of clothing showed what he'd been buried in. Objects in the coffin gave clues about his identity. Samples of hair, nails, and tissue were taken for tests that could reveal his diet, his health, and even where he grew up. Now the question remains, who exactly was this man? His burial in the Priory's chancel, the use of an expensive lead coffin, and the extraordinary preservation all suggested someone of prominence. Everything about the body screamed high status. All the signs of wealth and position weren't random. They belonged to someone history had recorded, and they were about to find out. When the sealed coffin at St. Bees was finally examined in detail, the mystery man inside was eventually identified as Anthony de Lucy, the third Baron Lucy of Cockermouth. His name might not ring out like Richard the Lionheart or Edward the Black Prince, but in his own time, Anthony was part of one of the most powerful families in northern England, a dynasty whose roots stretched deep into the unstable borderlands of Cumbria. The Lucy family's history was written in stone and steel. From their seat at Cockermouth Castle, they controlled large stretches of land across Cumberland and Westmoreland, regions that were continuously caught between the rival claims of England and Scotland. The Lucys had risen to prominence by defending this northern edge of England, and by the 14th century, they had secured a place among the great baronial families. Their family crest showed 3 interlocked fish, called Lucys or pike, and anyone in the region would have recognised it right away. Anthony was born in 1332, right into the family's legacy. With the title came money, but also big responsibilities. As the 3rd Baron Lucy, he had to look after his estates, keep order on his lands, and most importantly, fight for the king when called. The king at the time was Edward III, who was set on pushing England's claim to the French throne. So for Anthony, life meant splitting his time between battles overseas and guarding the border with Scotland. From what records we have, he seems to have been a loyal and reliable servant to the crown. Anthony's job wasn't just sitting around running his estates. A big part of it was grabbing men from the north whenever Scotland acted up, which happened a lot. The raids could be nasty. The Scots, especially back when Robert the Bruce was around, knew exactly when England was distracted and would swoop down, torch villages, and drive off the cattle. For lords like Anthony, holding the line wasn't some noble choice. It was flat-out survival, for their tenants and for themselves. Being a marcher lord meant living on edge, ready to fight at a moment's notice, while still trying to keep the books balanced back home. But his service didn't stop in Britain. Like many nobles of his rank, he was pulled into the larger stage of European conflicts. In the 14th century, English knights often joined campaigns abroad, partly out of religious duty, partly for honour, and partly for the chance to make connections. Anthony followed that path too. His most famous journey was to Prussia, where the Teutonic Knights still carried on crusades against the pagan Lithuanians. For men like Anthony, it was a way to earn the same kind of glory that earlier crusaders had won in the Holy Land. Anthony left England for one of these campaigns in the late 1360s. What happened after is hazy. What we do know is that he died in 1368, far from the castles of Cumbria and the royal court he had served. Whether it was battle wounds, disease, or simple bad luck, we can't be sure. But what we do know is that his family brought his body home. In that era, most knights who died abroad were buried where they fell. Moving a body across Europe was costly, complicated, and risky. Yet Anthony's relatives had him recovered, placed in a lead coffin, and carried all the way back to England. That effort says everything about how important he was to his family and their need to protect his legacy. They wanted him buried among his ancestors, remembered as a man of honour, not left behind in foreign soil. Anthony de Lucy travelled east as part of one of these campaigns in the late 1360s. Records are sparse, but what is clear is that he never returned home alive. He died abroad in 1368, far from the windswept castles of Cumbria or the halls of Edward III's court. The exact cause of his death remains uncertain, whether from wounds sustained in battle, from illness, or from some other misfortune. What is certain is that his death triggered a remarkable effort to ensure he was not left in foreign soil. His body was transported back across Europe, through dangerous and expensive logistics, all the way to England. That decision alone tells us much about his status and his family's devotion. In the medieval world, transporting a body over long distances was rare and often avoided because of the difficulty of preservation. Most knights who died on campaign were buried where they fell. For Anthony's relatives to go to the effort of recovering him, shipping his remains across thousands of miles, and entombing him in a specially constructed lead coffin indicates the importance they placed on his burial. The choice of St. Bees Priory as his final resting place was no accident either. The Lucy family had long-standing ties to the Priory, which had been founded in the Norman era and remained one of the most significant religious houses in Cumberland. It was a Benedictine community dedicated to prayer and service, and like many such institutions, it was supported by the patronage of local lords. For a family like the Lucys, the Priory was both a spiritual ally and a symbol of their power. By placing Anthony's body in the chancel, close to the altar, the family ensured not only that he was honoured in death, but also that prayers would continually be said for his soul. Medieval belief held that the living could help the dead reach heaven faster through masses, and proximity to holy places was thought to magnify that effect. A knight who had died far from home, fighting for Christendom in a foreign crusade, being laid to rest in sacred ground at St. Bees, tied together his worldly duty and his eternal hope. That should have been the end of it. A noble burial, prayers for the soul, the story closed. But it wasn't. Scientists finally began the full forensic examination of the St. Bees man. What they uncovered was unlike anything they had ever encountered in a medieval burial. Instead of a skeleton or dry, brittle remains, the body still carried the unmistakable features of a living man, features that had somehow been preserved for 6 centuries. The most striking detail was his torso. His chest looked strangely puffed up, as if the body had once swelled from within. Instead of collapsing into itself as centuries passed, his body had been locked in this inflated state, a kind of suspended decay. His skin, though discoloured, still clung to the body in sheets, making the figure appear eerily lifelike compared to the empty skeletons that usually filled medieval graves. And then there was his face. You could still make out faint stubble, a reddish beard clinging to his jaw, which made him feel weirdly close, like a guy who'd only been in the ground a few months, not 600 years. His skin had pulled tight and shriveled, sure, but the shape of his face was still right there. For scientists used to dealing with bare skulls and random bones, actually seeing hair, beard and skin made the whole thing feel very weird. Furthermore, the fingernails and toenails were preserved almost perfectly, clear enough that individual ridges could still be seen. The hands in particular made the corpse seem strangely modern. You could look at the curled fingers, with their intact nails, and forget for a moment that the man had been buried in the 14th century. These details alone would have made the St. Bees body exceptional. But what set it apart were the injuries, visible once forensic specialists began the autopsy. Careful examination revealed multiple broken ribs on one side of the chest. These fractures weren't the kind of clean breaks you might associate with old age or mishandling during excavation. They were sharp, violent and consistent with heavy blows delivered while the man was alive. The ribs had been shattered inward, puncturing and collapsing the lungs. Inside the chest cavity, traces of blood suggested massive internal hemorrhaging at the time of death. The pathologist concluded that he had suffered repeated, crushing trauma, injuries severe enough to cause rapid suffocation and eventual death. This picture strongly suggested violence, the kind one would expect on a battlefield. The collapse of the lungs and the bleeding pointed to forceful strikes, perhaps from a mace or the blunt edge of a polearm, weapons commonly used in 14th century warfare. Unlike cuts from swords, which leave sharp bone edges, blunt trauma produced exactly the kind of rib damage seen here. Whatever the precise weapon, the conclusion was inescapable. The man had not died peacefully. He had been struck down, his body sustaining terrible injuries in combat or in some other violent confrontation. The presence of intact internal organs added further weight to this interpretation. In most medieval burials, soft tissues are long gone, leaving only skeletal traces that tell partial stories. But here, pathologists could see evidence of lungs collapsed by trauma, of bleeding into the chest cavity, and even the enlarged state of other organs that hinted at the body's physical response in its final moments. Forensic scientists could read the story of his death in far greater detail than any other medieval body they had ever examined. Alongside the physical injuries, there were clues in his clothing, or rather, what remained of it. Fragments of a linen shroud were found wrapped around the body, suggesting that despite the violence of his death, he had been carefully prepared for burial. Linen was a common burial fabric in the 14th century, valued for its purity and association with religious rites. Even though his coffin was extraordinary, the choice of a covering connected his burial to the broader Christian tradition of the time. Still, none of that prepared anyone for what they saw next. Unlike the wooden boxes used for most burials, Anthony's was solid lead, fully encased and tightly sealed. That seal shut out oxygen, and without oxygen, the bacteria that normally eat away at a body couldn't do their work. In effect, the coffin created its own little capsule, where decay slowed to a crawl. Inside the coffin, chemistry did some of the work. Moisture mixed with fatty acids from the body, and, in places, turned into this soap-like stuff called adipotere, or grave wax. It's not pretty, but it can kind of seal things in and keep skin and organs from breaking down. Anthony's whole body didn't turn into the stuff, but there were traces of it, and that helped keep him in one piece. And then there's the ground itself. St. Bees sits on the coast, the soil damp and cool, and that kind of environment slows decay even more. Put that together with a lead coffin that was basically airtight, and you've got the perfect setup for a body to last way longer than you'd expect. But here's the thing, not everyone buys that it was just nature doing its job. Some think Anthony might have been embalmed before he was even brought home. Medieval embalmers weren't unheard of. Royals, especially, had their bodies treated with spices, resins, or alcohol mixes to keep them from rotting, especially if they had to travel. And Anthony died in Prussia, hundreds of miles away. Getting his body all the way back to Cumbria would have taken time, and without some extra care, he never would have made it. This suggests his body might have been treated with substances like pine resin, beeswax, or oils, natural preservatives available in the 14th century. These could have been poured into body cavities or applied to wrappings, offering protection during transit. Some even speculate that the Teutonic knights, among whom he died, might have had their own ritualized methods of preparing fallen comrades for long-distance burial. But when forensic scientists examined Anthony's remains, they found no definitive evidence of embalming agents. No resin residues, no wax traces, no unusual chemicals clinging to the tissues. The linen shroud showed no signs of saturation with oils. If such substances had been used in meaningful amounts, some residue should have survived. Instead, the body seemed untouched, lay in the coffin in a simple shroud, and was sealed away. Beyond the science, there's another side to this story: religion. In the medieval world, a body that resisted decay wasn't just unusual, it was often seen as a sign of holiness. Saints whose corpses stayed intact were believed to carry God's blessing, and people would travel miles just to see them, treating those remains as living proof of the divine. Anthony de Lucy was never declared a saint, and his family didn't make claims of miracles, but the image still carried weight. Here was a knight who had gone off to fight for Christianity in foreign lands, only to be brought home and sealed in a coffin that seemed to stop time. For people of his era, that could easily have been read as a symbol of purity or divine favour, even if no one said it out loud. Today, of course, scientists see it very differently. They don't need miracles to explain what happened. A tightly sealed lead coffin creates its own environment. No oxygen, trapped moisture, and just the right chemistry to slow decay. It's rare but not unheard of. Researchers point to other sealed burials across Europe, where bodies have been preserved in similar ways. From that perspective, Anthony's case isn't evidence of holiness, just a more extreme example of natural preservation. In fact, Europe has a handful of other stories where the dead just refuse to rot. The St. Bees man might seem like a total one-off, but he's not. Europe's got a handful of other bodies that refuse to rot too. Let's start in Halland, Sweden, where in 1936, peat diggers stumbled upon a fully clothed medieval man buried in a bog. Now known as the Boxton Man, he dates back to the 14th century. Unlike the St. Bees knight, who was sealed inside a coffin, the Boxton Man owed his remarkable condition to the peat bog itself. Bogs are nature's preservatives, acidic, low-oxygen environments where bacteria struggle to survive. What's even more fascinating about the Boxton Man is not just his leathery skin or hair, but his clothing. He wore a woolen cloak, a hood, a tunic, hose, and shoes, the only complete medieval male outfit ever found in Europe. For historians, this was a walking mannequin of 14th century fashion. But then comes the mystery. His skull showed trauma, and a wooden pole had been driven through his chest. Some argue he was murdered and pinned down to stop his ghost from rising. Others think he might have been a tax collector or some unpopular official killed by villagers. Unlike St. Bees, where the trauma points toward battle injuries, the Boxton Man feels like a story of execution. Jump ahead to the early 18th century, and you meet Friedrich von Karlbutz, a Prussian knight who died in 1702. When his coffin was opened centuries later, people expected bones. Instead, they found a mummified body, skin, flesh, and even clothing largely intact. What baffled everyone was that von Karlbutz had not been embalmed. Yet, his corpse simply refused to rot. I know what you're probably wondering. How on earth is any of this even possible? Let's dive into the answers. One popular line of thought is that the St. Bees knight was deliberately preserved using techniques that modern scholars have overlooked. We know medieval elites had access to oils, spices, and even imported resins from the East. These were expensive, often reserved for royalty or saints, but they were available. In heart burials, as we've seen elsewhere in Europe, spices and resins were stuffed into cavities to keep organs from rotting quickly. Maybe the body was washed in wine, anointed with oils, or sealed with wax before burial. All of these would slow bacterial activity. Even substances like quicklime, paradoxically, could either destroy or preserve, depending on how they were applied. The trouble is, chemical analysis of the St. Bees man hasn't revealed the obvious fingerprints of embalming, no thick residues of resin, no spices ground into the wrappings. That silence makes the embalming theory a bit sketchy, but that's not the end of it. Another explanation centres on the lead coffin itself. A lead coffin is essentially a sealed chamber. Once the lid is soldered shut, air exchange with the outside world drops dramatically. Without oxygen, bacteria have a much harder time breaking down flesh. But most people buried in lead coffins didn't end up looking like the St. Bees man. Archaeologists have opened plenty of them, only to find skeletons or partial remains. So why did this one work so well? For some people, the natural sciences will never fully explain what happened. In medieval Europe, when bodies didn't decay, it was often seen as a sign of sainthood. Incorruptibility was a marker that the person had lived a holy life. Even today, Catholic tradition holds that saints whose bodies resist decay are blessed with a supernatural sign of God's favour. The fact that modern science can't replicate his condition exactly only deepens the religious conviction. Of course, the other side pushes back against these theories. For some, the St. Bees man is nothing supernatural. He's simply an accident of the environment. The soil composition, the body's own chemistry, all of it lined up to slow decay. Nothing more. They point to countless examples of other miracle bodies that, once studied with modern tools, turned out to have clear scientific explanations. It's rare but not impossible. The knight just got lucky. But maybe it's not so black and white. There's a growing line of thought that says the St. Bees man might actually represent both natural preservation and deliberate treatment. Think about it. The body could have been prepared with oils or wrapped carefully before burial, but it was the lead coffin and soil chemistry that locked that preparation into place. One without the other might not have worked. What's most interesting is that these theories tell you just as much about the people arguing as they do about the body. Scientists see physics, chemistry, and bacteria. Religious people see miracles and sainthood. And people who love the romance of the Middle Ages imagine secret embalming recipes hidden away in old manuscripts. Everyone brings their own view to him. Museums knew right away they had something powerful. They didn't put Anthony's actual body on display, but they built exhibitions around him. Replicas, CT scans, panels explaining the science. And people showed up. For visitors, it was a rare, close look into the medieval world. And it was unsettling. Seeing the injuries he'd taken, or realising his organs had lasted 600 years, broke the idea that history is just in books or old stones. Suddenly it felt near. Almost uncomfortably so. The fascination with bodies that don't decay has always gone beyond simple curiosity. In Catholic tradition, saints whose remains resist rot are called incorruptibles, their preservation seen as proof of divine favour. For centuries, pilgrims have travelled to see them, convinced that the lack of decay was a miracle. But the St. Bees man doesn't fit that story. He wasn't a saint. He wasn't laid to rest with relics or special prayers. And yet, his body held on, as if it had been. That's what makes him so fascinating. Across cultures and across time, we've always been drawn to the dead who refuse to disappear. From Egyptian mummies to Scandinavian bog bodies to modern embalming gone unexpectedly well. And maybe that's the real point. We can explain the chemistry, the soil, the sealed coffin, but standing in front of someone who should have been dust 6 centuries ago, you don't think about science first. You just feel the strangeness of it, the closeness, the reminder that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried.